A little bit of background about myself. I started out with D&D 4th Ed, and I was a player, but eventually I was forced by my GM to become a GM. And then along the way, after like 2-3 years of playing, I eventually ended up being a playtester for this Fantasy 20 called 13th Age. And along with Dungeon World, I'll be borrowing or I'll be referencing these two systems extensively for the following topic or discussion. Especially since, for me, or this is a personal preference. For me, Dungeon World is something that all GMs should at least read and consider, because the way I see it, Dungeon World is the best beginner's guide to being a GM. Now, with regards to encounters, I'm pretty sure that all the GMs here ran an encounter, because it's basically what we all do all the time. But here's the question: what is an encounter? Now, there is also something that we usually refer to as the scene, and for the most part, we tend to interchange the two. This is partially because even the Dungeon Master's Guide of the D&D references it as such. In this case, according to the Dungeon Master's Guide, an encounter is a single scene in an ongoing drama when the player characters come up against something that impedes their progress. So, it's interchangeable for D&D. You have a setting or a scene, something comes up, you fight it or you overcome it, and then the drama continues. However, this is not the only definition that we have. In White Wolf, for those who are running the system, according to the SAS guide, each scene is built as a discrete game encounter or a closely tied collection of game encounters for the troop to play through. Sounds the same, but the big difference is that for White Wolf, one scene is multiple encounters, but in D&D, it's one encounter, one scene. This is important because, well, according to the Angry DM, his definition is that an encounter is a sequence of actions that answer a dramatic question by resolving one or more conflicts. So we break that definition down. Why do we need to define the encounter? For us to understand and improve our encounters, we have to know what we're doing in the first place. And one of the many failings or shortcomings of a GM is that we end up running an encounter that does not seem like it doesn't make sense or it does not have any context. In addition, it also tends to be very long. As mentioned several times earlier, it's like, when does this thing die? I'm worried. It's already boring. So, what we are going to do now is to discuss, or we're going to fix that, basically. And for us to do that, we need to know, well, first and foremost, aside from the definition of that encounter, what are the types? Well, simply put, since we only have 1 hour to discuss this, there are only 2 types of encounters, or 2 types of scenes. That has one that involves conflict and one that doesn't. For Dungeon World, this is very keen, or this is very obvious. For the D20 in general, it's harder to see this. In Dungeon World in particular, there is no initiative, there is no stats involving we call this opposing skill checks. Instead, you have one roll regardless if it's an attack or if it's a skill check. Why is this so? Because in Dungeon World in particular, this is where the only objective is to resolve conflict. And when it's not resolving, if it's a scene that doesn't involve conflict, just go play it out. Plain and simple. Now, with regards to building encounters, I'm just going through the definitions and such because this is the longest part. Developing your encounters. First and foremost, we have to see the mechanical aspect. I'm not going to specify any systems, but because if we're going to build or go into detail with every system, we're just going to take forever with that. Instead, we're going to ask a few things regarding the mechanics and the narrative. With regards to the mechanics, you have to ask yourself, when is a scene too hard or too easy for the players? So, it should be obvious if you're gonna read through the DMG. Because, let's say example, for 3rd ed, you have the challenge rating. For 4th ed, you have the XP table. And I believe other systems have their own equivalents in terms of scene building or combat encounter building. The second question, however, is should a scene be too easy or too hard? In this case, we need to have context. And for that context, we'll look at the narrative, but that will be later on. The third one, mechanical aspect of encounter development. How about the I win buttons? I believe everyone who's run Fantasy 20 or D20 games knows the sleep spell at level 1. Roll will save, fail, basically encounter over. Yeah. It's for us players, it's the best spell ever. Level 1 is great, it's 10 power.
Oh my god, they're all elves.
Yeah, that's the thing, yeah. So the question is, should the GM just do something about it? Should he shut it down? By introducing elves. Say a party of elves fights you all of a sudden. Where's the spell is useless? Well, that is a point of contention. Maybe in some games it's okay, but for the most part, doing that just makes the player feel like you're being a dick. Kasi you're just you saw he saw you, or you saw him do something great and you nerfed it just because you didn't anticipate. The Angry DM makes a great analogy here when he compares D&D with, or an encounter with golf. In golf, for those who know it on the game, you have this hole-in-one. Basically, you do something so spectacular, the game ends in just one shot. What do the players do, or what does everybody do? They don't bereave him because he finished the game too early. Instead, they cheer him up. They say, "Congratulations, did something excellent." This is something that we as GMs, I think, have to do as on our part, because in the end, it's everybody. I mean, you're going to end the encounter anyway. The answer of let's go back to the definition of the Angry DM. That an encounter needs to answer a dramatic question. Do we need to lengthen the session just because the dramatic question was already answered? Not do it? No, diba? So, when the dramatic question is answered, we just go on. Go to the next scene, take notes, maybe anticipate it, but not nerf it outright. Don't just change the entire game so that you won't use it all the time. Or parang siguro make it to the point na if it really annoys you, just talk to the player. Its communication is key here, not just in terms of encounter development or encounter building, but in campaign development as well. And by the way, the reason why I'm gonna be touching on campaign development is because of the context and because encounters are the micro level of campaign development. What you do in one session will affect your entire campaign. Right? So while I'm talking about encounters, I will need to discuss the campaign as well. This is where we go to the narrative. Within the context of the game, I keep mentioning the dramatic question. The the dramatic question is basically like this. Why is there an encounter? Because one of the most annoying things is that, imagine this. You are a bunch of warriors, plated steel and everything. Dungeon Master rolls at 2 random tables. He suddenly says, oh, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, 12 rhino tanks appear. Sobrang out of place, di ba? It's like, napaka disgruntling, and it removes you from the fantasy, removes you from the engagement. And basically, when you say, okay, you're fighting this for the sake of fighting it, it's not interesting. Generally, I think everybody agrees on that. It's not interesting for just to run an encounter for the sake of running an encounter. You just have a scene with no development, no context whatsoever. Now, the second thing that you have to ask is what is at stake for the party. For example, this is one thing that or the example given by Angry DM. A party enters a cave. The question is why? Maybe the party is looking for something at the other side. Is there a dramatic question? None. However, if, let's say, prior to that encounter or that scene, there were already several options, and the best option was to go to the cave, then you're fine and dandy, no questions asked. Now, I have to go to the third as well. What is at stake for the third party or the enemies involved? In the example given by Angry DM, you have a spider, a giant spider. If you threw the giant spider in there with no context whatsoever, it's just gonna be a battle patrician. Throwing the giant spider, okay, fight, done. That would be a boring encounter for sure. But if you put the setting, you tell the players, you're in a dark cave, and you suddenly see spider webs all over. And when you see that the spider comes down, nearby there are a bunch of spider eggs. There's already context there. The spider's stake is that she is protecting her nest. All of a sudden, it's become more interesting. The players have something to do other than just fight.
You don't have to kill the spider.
Exactly. The object, as long as the dramatic question is answered, everything's fine, regardless if there's hit points involved or not.
Yeah, but you still kill the spider even with the eggs.
Oh, that's
That's the fun part.
Read my own spider.
Except for one.
You kill the spiders and you kill the eggs.
Yes. You didn't get the extreme words. Okay, this is where I touch on another thing, which for me tends to jar from the experience as well. Some of the game mechanics, especially in D20, tend to result in a disjointed experience. Experience points in particular are a major issue of mine. Yeah, especially since when I started playing as a fourth head, the first thing that my DM did, kasi I started at level 19, and then the rest of the party, some of them were level 18. The first thing he said on the table was that, okay, you're level 19. No questions asked. No referencing the XP table. No reasons given why he's level 10. Just, okay, you're level 19. Then, for me, that solves a lot of issues, especially with regards to encounter design. Since one major issue that I've had regarding the mechanical and the narrative is putting high-level players alongside low-level players. If there's a narrative for it, fine and dandy, but you have to consider the mechanical impact. Do you throw the low-level players alongside? And how do you make sure that these low-level players know what they're getting into? And do they have an option to get out? Especially newbies. I won't be mentioning any names, but I know a DM whose favorite hobby is to kill new players.
Yeah.
Now, that will be fine if everybody's into it. I mean, but if you do it without warning, sometimes that
Breaks hearts.
yeah, breaks hearts and
Shatters.
and it loses the player base. That's
And to be a little bit more serious, it might result in people not wanting to play TRPGs again.
Yes.
True.
Exactly, yes.
Yun yung-
Not just with you.
Nagkaroon siya parati.
Yes. Now that's why whenever I provide suggestions, it's like, okay, do this, but be open. Make the communication is always key to any relationship, and especially when it comes to DMs and players alike. If they know that this is a horror setting, make sure everybody's on the same page. And if they kill themselves, not your problem anymore.
That's why they're in charge.
Now, let's go for encounter-related house rules. Okay. Random encounter tables is a very commonly used house rule. I believe it originated from First Ed, D&D, and even though it was not really incorporated into most editions, officially, everybody has their own tables.
Wandering monster.
Wandering Monsters, yes. And I believe Gary Gygax himself was one of those who first encouraged the use of random encounter tables. But there's one thing that has to be, one of the things that makes it so interesting is that aside from that it lowers the prep time, it also gives you, well, this is what Gary Gygax basically said, that random encounter tables give you more realism because stuff other than what's planned by the DM is happening around the world. So, if you use it properly, random encounter tables are awesome. Especially if you're gonna throw in 12 rhino tanks, make it an urban military setting. Wag naman yung primitive, yung medieval arms and armor, and then all of a sudden you have unless of course if you have a setting where wizards suddenly summon tanks out of nowhere.
Yes.
Or it literally means random encounter.
Yes. So, yeah, actually, one of the first settings I ran for, or one of the first campaigns I ran for 13th Age was that, ang ganda na nangyari kasi one of my players had this unique thing. It's a narrative ability that's only your character has.
One unique.
Yes, one unique thing. And her unique thing was that her soul was bound to the Archmage. I'll be discussing icons later. And basically, because her story is basically that the Elminster of the campaign died and his soul is emerged into hers. The portals that the magic that was keeping the world safe and sane was breaking down. So one of the first things I did was that I basically brought in stormtroopers because they were portaled in from Star Wars, even though it was a medieval fantasy setting. I had context for that, so at least I have a justification for it. That's how the thing that has to be done is always put things into context. Just like was mentioned in the Alamat ng Astig and this Haring Agimat. Even in L5R, you have to have context. And with regards to context, you also have factions. This is what for me makes RPGs more interesting. Is that you're not doing this by yourself. You're doing this as part of something in the world. Now, in D&D, specifically D&D, because of the use of alignment. Now, alignment can be a great tool, but it can be a horrible tool as well. Everybody, I believe, has an experience, one session or another, where people either argued because of alignment or something happened badly because of it. Detect evil, yes.
You see the guy beside you.
the way I see it kasi, if you look at the history of D&D, it's basically good versus evil. It's law versus chaos. In fact, the first alignment was literally law and chaos, with the paladins originally being lawful, but only implying that it's lawful good. This is where I think alignment should be taken into consideration as what they did with 5th Ed, wherein alignment is a force upon itself. It's an organization rather than just a role-playing guide. So instead of being lawful good because this is your morality, you're lawful good because the gods that you're worshiping, or the principles that you are worshiping, empower you as and because you're siding with law and good, not just law and not just good. I believe Stormbringer, first edition onwards, is a great example of it as well, wherein you can make a character, but if you choose to be on the side of law, you get these benefits. If you decide to be on the side of chaos, you get these awesome weapons and spells. Of course, you're gonna be siding with demons and they could keep your soul. That's not my problem. Now, with factions, L5R is a great example of how it's done in a when it comes to multiple factions. I don't need to elaborate upon it since it was discussed earlier. But one thing that I have to warn, especially for those who run D20, if you're gonna use factions, please make sure that it's either working with alignment or it does not include alignment. Because it's easy to say that you're, let's say, lawful good, you're a lawful good paladin, and all of a sudden you have to deal with the shades of gray that are happening in your order, and you have to choose between killing this child for the sake of millions and not killing because it's a child. Those stuff tend to ruin friendships. Now, with regards to factions and icons, they're in a way related. Icons, for me, this is a mechanic from 13th Age. Na instead of factions as a group, you talk about the individuals within the group, the major characters within the group. So instead of talking about the Roman Catholic Church, you're talking about the Pope. Instead of talking about the government, you talk about the president. While there's no immediate distinction, one of the things that I love about this icons, by the way, 13th Age, I highly recommend at least peruse because there are a lot of good house rules you can get from. I'll be adding one more here later. Icons give you an opportunity to create and use narrative villains. Narrative villains are very rarely used in RPGs because we tend to put villains as mechanical villains. We give them stats, we give them ranks or we give them skills, and then we just throw them at the players. I believe First Ed did this mistake as well, which is why gods were killable. And while it made the player powerful, especially when you see, oh, I killed Isis, or I killed Bahamut. Yeah, the question is, how does that evolve your story? How does that evolve your gameplay? Parang, yeah, you killed him. So what? This is where the narrative comes in. Instead of throwing this person in such a way, or into the party in such a way na he's killable, he's easy to get rid of, it's more like Lex Luthor, wherein you have, even if you kill Lex Luthor, he has so expansive an empire of criminality that you can never stop it, even if you're Superman. So, with regards to building your encounters, this is where I would recommend using factions and icons, especially with regards to how icons interact with your players. Because in 13th Age, player characters are directly connected to icons in one way or another. It makes them relevant to the setting. immediately because, for example, if let's say you are the bastard son of the emperor, you're the because you are at odds. You know secrets about the emperor that would make you an enemy, but he needs your help. So there's a dynamic already between the players and the icons and the factions that are working with and against the emperor without having to put in so many mechanical details. May maganda pa dito sa ginawa sa icons. It uses the basic mechanics of alignment, so it's actually easier to introduce factions using icons first. So let's say you have 3 points of a conflicted relationship with the emperor. You know a lot of stuff, and you can pull out a lot of favors by using those relationships. It's very meaty details in 13th Age. I'm not gonna elaborate too much here. But the point is, you should not only give players a reason to interact with the world, but you should incentivize, you should reward them for interacting with the world. That's the whole point of factions and icons in this particular manner. Now, one thing I didn't mention here, which I discussed with Fabs earlier, is the use of the escalation die. This is another mechanic from 13th Age that I find very useful, especially for those who are suffering from long encounters. As in, yung fights nyo go beyond, let's say, 10 or more rounds and nobody's hitting anyone. It happens. The escalation die, before anything else, the escalation die, I would not recommend for every encounter, every setting. Kasi, you have to think of the context. The escalation die represents heroism at work. Because when in our story, in some of our adventure stories, the hero wins. That's the basic assumption. Especially with regards to Kung Fu movies and high action, let's say Lord of the Rings, you know that even though everything's against the heroes, in the end, they're gonna win. And that narrative drive is what empowers the escalation die. The escalation die is very simple. Starting around 2, you bring out a 6-sided die with the number 1 facing up. Whatever value is facing up, you add to the attack rolls of all the players. So let's say round 2, give a +1 to everyone, round 3 +2, up until round 7 +6. Mechanically speaking, that's a huge bonus already for all the players. It incentivizes players to not use their alpha strike abilities until later. Kasi why throw all your attacks in round 1 when you can get a +3 or +4 by round 5 or 6? Sure, hit na yun. Hindi mo masasayang yung dailies mo. Hindi mo masasayang yung spells mo. So, it's not, the escalation die is not for everyone, especially for those in the horror genre. Yes, I love my horror settings, Call of Cthulhu, but especially Lamentations of the Flame Princess. I love that system. But for those that
escalation dun sa kalaban.
yes, by the way, Mike Merles, for those who don't know, he's the guy behind D&D 5th Ed and at some level 4th Ed as well. He inadvertently created this custom rule called the dungeon dice, which is basically the escalation die for the dungeon. So as the longer the players stay in the dungeon, the more powerful the monsters get. So that the escalation die can be played around with a lot of ways. So I'd recommend it for those who want a specific flavor. Diablo, yeah. So if you want them to go out, let's say example, every 6 adventures you want them to just go out of the dungeon. Okay, give them give the dungeon a dungeon die that increases +1 every scene, especially when they make a mistake with a trap or when they refuse to rest. So that's basically it for my presentation. If you have any, or if you'd like to discuss anything else, please feel free to raise your hand. Okay. With regard to 13th age, actually, is to put in a story complication. Whenever you forcefully rest, kasi in 13th age, instead of playing by time, you play with number of encounters. So every 4 5 encounters, if the GM is nice, he'll grant you a daily heal up. So basically refresh everything, and it's up to you to give a narrative for it. You can force to do that. You can willingly do that. Exactly, specifically for the 15-minute workday, but the trade-off is what do you call this? The term I believe is campaign loss. You won the battle, but you're losing the war. In this case, for example, the goal of the session is to save the mayor's daughter from a ritual. Okay, you alpha strike, you get out, you rest, you basically forcefully rest. By the time you come back there, she's dead. She's dead. She's a zombie already. What do?
You already summoned the demon lord with the blood of the virgin.
Yeah, so
Might as well rest.
you want it to be a trade-off with the players. Okay, you do that. You just make it harder for yourself. If you want to save if you want to do better and easier in the long run, you're better off with pushing on rather than 15-minute breaks. Because if you're just gonna do that, keep on doing that, I am incentivized by the system and by my authority as a DM to make things more complicated. Plus, one of the things I love about campaign loss and icons as well is that it makes the world more dynamic. Now, I have to elaborate on the icons thing later with regards to how it makes it more elaborate and more immersive. But campaign losses in particular, they make the world more engaging and immersive because stuff happens while you rest. Stuff happens because you failed. And that's one of the things that D20 for me, especially 4th ed, 3rd ed, and some level 2nd ed, based on my play experience, it's probably different for others. The game does not have any incentive for the DM to change anything. If the players rest for 8 hours, it's a GM suggestion for something to happen during that 8 hours. But there's no mechanical incentive.
But I don't think that's a system. You could tie that to the system because it's supposed to be the DM's campaign.
Yes.
Right? It doesn't matter. Stuff should happen.
Yes.
Whether you're playing second ed or even the
Yeah.
red box.
Right.
I disagree with that. I'm sorry. I don't think you can tie it with the game system.
It's I think for me the reason why it ties up with the game system at all for 13th age kasi is
Just
that
because it's not in the rules doesn't mean the DMs or the playing group who doesn't do it. Because I have game since
that's why
the 80s.
I said it's different for other groups.
That
Kasi
doesn't happen because my campaigns during those time, 80s, 81, ganun, stuff happens outside.
Yeah, that's one of the things. That's one of the things that GMs should take into consideration. But because there are no reminders, not all of them do it, which is sad. I understand your point.
Okay.
I agree with it. We should do that, and that's why there should be a reminder in the BMG, in our notes that stuff happens while we're
It's
resting.
not about, I don't think it's about the reminder. It's about experience. You will get that. You will play that role first few times. Eventually you will get it right.
Exactly. So that's one of the ways that to discourage the 15-minute workday.
And at the end of the day, the players cannot win with the DM or GM ever because it's all a matter of numbers. You're level 100, there's a level 200 guy waiting for you. Diba? You have a +5 sword, these guys will be carrying +10 for days. It's all about numbers. Diba? And kaya nga, pag sa Dota, mahirap pag naka-level up na sila. Mahirap na habulin eh. It's all about math. And kahit magaling kayo mag-push, kung talagang na out-level na kayo, mahirap na.
It also depends din kasi when your players get to a level wherein they have good numbers, for me, one of the worst things that you can do as a GM is to just give them higher challenges. Para sa akin, you should also give them
Let them enjoy the
let them enjoy their being strong.
For a time.
And then the Demon Lord that they let loose earlier.
Suddenly, are you
This is the wonderful thing about DMing in general. We have different styles, we have different preferences, and we have different campaign stories. So in some cases, you want the story to go straight from challenge to challenge, goes higher and higher.
Right.
Some GMs would prefer spreading out the challenge so that instead of just pure fighting, you have social aspects. And this is where instead of we use alignment alone, we use factions, we use icons, we use 50 Shades of Grey.
I don't know.
Must be the book of erotic fantasy.
I will remind everyone, this is all being recorded.
I agree with that.
50 Shades of Grey.
But sometimes, the most bitter loss isn't a physical or a mechanical one, that you were run down by an army or the encounter. It's a psychological loss that you failed in some goal.
Right,
Well,
exactly.
whether it's rescuing someone, it's like the Spider-Man, you have to choose between one or the other. And it's those tough decisions that make your games unforgettable. Because throughout the years, when you guys grow older, you will not talk about your pluses or how you min-maxed your feet. You will talk about the stories behind your game.
Exactly. That's that's why I like how how 13th Age in particular reminds us of the campaign loss, because it's something that we get wrong the first few times, and
Yeah.
experience has to teach us. At least with the system that I'm talking about, it already tells us, okay, this is what you should have done. Let's now try incorporating it into your games.
Do you know why it started with the dungeon? Because the dungeon was the easiest way to put all the information and contain your
And not
players
change it
and not
until the
change
players arrive.
anything. It's a good learning process if you're a newbie DM with a newbie group, you're starting out your own group, and the dungeon is there. You turn left, there are goblins, you turn right, there's a trap, you go forward, there's loot.
They don't really ask why the goblins are just
Yeah,
there.
they're just there. Sometimes you don't need stories for the first few sessions. You just go to the tavern. I remember yung una namin game, UPC, BPC, let's play! And then 7 attributes drop from the sky, and then you
Literally, 7 attributes. 18!
Thank you. That is a very enlightening experience. Any other questions?
So how do you do the balancing when you're dealing with, there's several types of players here, right?
Mhm.
Some players really just want to be power hungry and I can do this, I can do that, I can take away all my offhand bonuses with this. Well, how do you balance it out with those power hungry players in your experience?
Okay, with my experience, it's been really tough. I would have to admit that. Kasi, for those, parang just to bring it out to the open, my experience with DMs is less than 10 years. I started with like 2005, and basically, because it's mostly 4th ed. So, and not just 4th ed, it was with Living Forgotten Realms. So a lot of tactical stuff. Not much on the role playing. The only role playing I did was for the first session, which I was recording. I mentioned the Ignore XP, and then I dabbled into Eberron and Dark Sun after that. But most of the role playing in our game in our group was in the form of stuff that we never expected happen. Like, for example, there was this scene where I believe it was in a Baldur's Gate LFR module, and I did not read any instructions on the book on how to what would happen if the players decide to split the party.
Okay.
Because it was like, okay, this column is for those who choose if the party goes here. This the column for the party goes here. There you go. The part in one of my friends who was playing, I said, okay, let's split the party. That was very rash. What? So I just had to do everything offhand, and then I ended up with one of the NPCs who was not supposed to fight in the first place, fighting one of the enemies that was supposed to be a challenge for the PCs. And what the players did, they got chairs, and then they betted on who was gonna win. What's that? Like, okay, let's go. Now,
PCs.
so that's PCs, yeah.
I'd rather play
That's the
alone.
background. So this is the background I'm coming from. So I had at least one player who's very power gaming,
Okay.
and it came to a point wherein he suggests, parang he took advantage of a house rule I made for our group, wherein we ignore the errata on free actions and quick actions or minor actions.
Yeah.
So he took advantage of that rule, and then it came to a point. I said, "Okay, guys,
What did it back?
yeah." I said it was fun running it, but I can see why there was an errata. And as much as I'd like to have fun with it, especially for you guys to have fun with it, I have to shut it down because it's making my life too hard. So that's parang my perspective on how to handle issues. Just plain talk to them. Communication is the first thing that has to be done, especially from creation pa lang. I go, okay, I'm using this system because the other system was way too hard for me to run, and I believe that it fits my style, my GMing style even more. If you're not comfortable with it, okay, I respect your decision. If you're going to leave or adjust. Second, your system of choice. This is why I love Dungeon World, I love 13th Age, and I love Lamentations of the Flame Princess. Even though balance-wise, there may be chinks in the armor, especially with Lamentations, since it's...
I cast a summon spell. Oh my god!
Yeah.
Basically,
yeah. Yung parang even before you make house rules or make judgments, the system is doing it already for you. So if it's easy if you're capable, you're experienced with the system that you're using, and you know how to rein in all these power games before they even abuse the system, then all the better. So as if you are aware of the system of the shortcomings of the system, as much as possible, make the house rules agad and then present it. Okay, guys, these are my house rules because I want this. I want the system, the game to run in a certain way. If you agree with me, fine. If you don't, well, let's see what you can do instead. Yes.
Well, based on my experience, parang sometimes I tend to deal with power gamers. Hindi maiwasan yan, laging meron.
Yeah.
Now, my old GM, what he always do is, even if the party doesn't separate, he will force the party to separate. For example, one of the wizard will cast an ice wall between the two party, and then the power gamer will have a tougher opponent simply because in context, the enemies know who are the powerful person in the group, so they will have a harder enemy compared to the other guys. But again, what I always do is I always make the battle harder for those guys that know their stuff. Basta wag lang aabot siguro na makakalata na siya na pinapahirapan ko. Pero the good news is, but the good news is, if he is really a power gamer that loves to battle, sana ma-appreciate niya yun, parang ganun.
Yeah.
So,
it's a good thing you brought that up because there are some and it's not easy to pull off. I think you can agree with me with that.
yeah, exactly.
Especially if you, actually I have in yung DM na sinasabi ko na mahilig pumatay ng newbies. He tends to but he had, he doesn't, it's not that he doesn't separate, he does, but sometimes it's really difficult to keep the high level players away from the low level players. And I actually read one GM who did this spectacularly kasi he used the system to his advantage din eh. He saw that the player, the power gamer, was a sniper. He was super maxed out. So what happened was that while the other players were on a ground fight, urban warfare na sila lang naglalaro, the power gamer was in a sniping standoff with another powerful sniper. So it will have to depend, yun nga, on the system that you're using. Regardless if parang regardless of how you execute it, the important thing is that there's communication. One other thing that I forgot to mention, it also helps, or it sometimes helps, if the power gamers and the non-power gamers collaborate. In fact, I would recommend collaboration on every level, is depending on the campaign being run. If you like Fiasco or L5R where people are backstabbing each other, then disinformation would be a fun thing to do. But if you, but if let's say you're playing a game like D&D where you have to cooperate in order to survive, it would help if, let's say, the power gamer who knows his stuff helps improve the stats ng guy who is just there for the story aspect.
Here's how I do it. Ironically, from my experience through all these years, the best way to deal with the power gamers is to let them enjoy.
Yeah.
When they least expect it, okay, you make them realize and humble them. Okay, give an example. We were playing a superhero campaign. He maxed out his computer hacking skills. Okay? So he would hack into banks, steal millions, go into insurance, fraud, do millions, okay? So was very rich, yeah. Let enjoy it. So buy everything. And then eventually, after 3 sessions, he lost it all. The Interpol was at his house and he was being arrested. And he asked, bakit nangyari to, DM1? Because there's someone else better than you in the world. Hindi lang ikaw yung pinakamagaling. Sa hacking, diba? There's always someone better than you, even if sabihin mong you're using technology. But eventually, yun. And then, after that, nalaman niya na, oops, yeah, hindi ako yung pinakamagaling in the multiverse. Let's not even call it the universe. There will always be someone better.
Oh, and to add to what Mon said, kasi I'm a power gamer. I'm not even a GM. I'm just here because Mark is my buddy, so he asked me to help him organize. I'm more of a player, and my reason for power gaming is I want to win. I want to. Okay, I'm gonna stealth. I'm gonna stealth behind these row of guards. Of course, I don't want to fail, diba? And yeah, what Mr. Mon said. Let us let us feel the power kasi after that yung consequences, that's when we feel the consequences of what we did. Toby, when I burned down the when I burned down an organic spaceship. Diba? When I burned down an organic spaceship kasi Fate has no levels eh. First session, I burned down an organic gigantic spaceship. I died, but I became a god who started his own planet. Diba?
That's something it has to be considered in encounter design. Or actually,
so I guess if you have a power gamer, know what he wants. I mean, kasi the GMs I play under, they know me talaga eh.
Pero add ko lang doon. Actually, tama naman sinabi. In a few sessions, mag-enjoy sila. Yun nga lang, as a GM, you have to know
when to hit.
Pag nagka-suffer na, yung mga lower level
Yeah.
players,
Yung other players you actually have to watch for the power gamer.
And
Parang, in the end, yun talaga eh. Let him enjoy, but not at the expense of others.
exactly.
DMBJ, salamat ah.
I know 2 power gamers. One is Fabs and one is a friend that I will not name. But kasi and even though he's a power gamer, I enjoyed playing with him. I enjoyed the story, it was hilarious, and I enjoyed myself.
As the ship
Even if I died, thank you, I died. But anyway,
Ay, si Mira yun.
I enjoyed it. And it
Si Mira yun. Si Mira yung nag-iwan sa'yo.
By extension.
Still destroyed the ship.
Still
I vanish in the
destroyed
shadows and
ship.
leave her alone.
You still destroyed the ship. So, yun nga, parang kami mga lubies, okay lang sa amin kasi na-compliment kami ni Fabs. Yung isang, ano naman, yung isang unnamed one, parang mula character creation, D&D, fourth ed, pinapakailaman niya yung creation ko, ito gawin mo, ito gawin mo, ito gawin mo. To the point that, alpha male siya talaga, to the point na, ay sabi ko, okay, I wanted a pet baby dragon. And then sabi niya, no, you cannot get a pet baby dragon, that's not
Because
good for
blah,
the,
blah, blah.
minimin-max niya. And then sabi ko, Mark, can I get a pet baby dragon? Sabi niya, of course, I'm getting a pet baby dragon!
Speak louder.
Hanggang sa hanggang sa to the point na yung campaign, it revolved around him. He can end battles in one strike. Ganon, hindi na kami nakaka-battle. That was serious.
That's thank you for bringing that up. Kasi yun nga, we have to have, it's a good thing that many, kasi even if there's power gaming, there has to be context, and it has to be, yun nga, there has to be a narrative wherein everybody can participate in. Because, as GMs, you have to balance between gameplay and narrative. Now, yun nga, it's okay that the power gamer helps, but when he is directing the story, it's like, why aren't you the GM? Well, you're already ready.
I would like to add that I don't want him to be a GM.
Point taken. He's better off writing his own story. He should market his own storybook.
Here's a tip that I do from experience. Usually the power gamers, when they first play, first few sessions nila, yun yung pinaka, like Fab said, yun yung pinaka-enjoyment nila. So what I do, I classify players into several types. There's a story guy who doesn't know Jack kung what armor class is and what, wala siya alam doon. Or what do I add to saving throw? Ilang beses mo na sinabi, what do I roll? Ilang beses mo na sinabi, what do I roll? Okay, I give up. But when it comes role-playing doon sila, you give them time to enjoy themselves in the story setting, and then eventually during the outcome of your game, give them a spotlight to be in a mechanical setting. Then they will learn to vice versa with the power gamer, di ba? I have all the stats, I have all the weapon, warped blades, lahat. Then put him in a story setting. That, lahat ng gamit niya, lahat ng spells niya, would it help him? Okay? So parang there was this instance.
And
May gamer ako, power gamer, so we had to go to this, the Towers of High Sorcery, which was very old, so Dragon Lance. So, during the test, dalawa sila it's pair by pair. So, merong altar. So, tapon tayo ng so, everything that the altar touches disintegrate. So, sabi ko, what do you do? I jump on the altar. So, what? Gusto ko yun. Sabi nung kasama niya, pair by pair. Sabi nung kasama niya, sabi ko, wait. Let him do. He maxed out his character sheet, ganun. He's all powerful. Again, for the last time, I asked him, what do you do? I jump on the altar. Oh, you're dead. DMs do not kill players. That's my number one rule. When I was doing professional Magic, hindi ako tinalo ng kalabang ko. I let that happen because of a mistake. Anything from hearts or so that's you should do that and remember that in context when you're DMs. DMs do not kill players, but the players actually do that themselves.
Right.
And to compliment what Mon said, it's nice pitting power gamers in situations they know they can't handle. Kasi that shocks them. Kasi whenever I'm in a role-playing situation. Kasi I think I'm a narrative power gamer. Oy, ninanarrate ko naman kung paano ko hinampas yung kalabang ko, Sabihin ko, I swing my club wildly and it speeds through the air. At least I do that, diba?
You get a plus 3!
Yun, I mean, so parang nasa situation ako, in a role-playing situation, my stats are utterly useless. And okay, on surface levels, shit, wala akong magagawa. Pero on a deeper level kasi it shocks the human na, okay, I'm not just playing a robot. I'm actually playing a sentient creature that can think, that can socialize, that can decide. So when you shock the power gamer kasi, I think good things come out.
In a nice way. Like, let me add to Fab, no? Power gaming is a phase. You enjoy that when you're young. I used to do that to my GM and practice campaigns. And eventually it will
20
pass.
years ago.
As long as 20 years ago. So it's a phase that will pass. Yeah, I actually met Gary Gygax. So
Buti ka ba ako, Larry Elmore lang ako eh. Larry Elmore lang ako.
So, yun. Eventually, they will realize na there's more to role-playing than just my stats and my items. Sa kanila, a knight is good if I have magic items. Uy, Dibs! Hindi mo kailangan yan. Akin na, hindi ka.
Actually, good thing you mentioned all of that because, well, despite the shortcomings na na-mention ko sa GM kanina, he has this one awesome trait.
I don't like.
He places players outside the box. He makes players think outside the box. And I agree that placing not just power gamers but all players outside of their comfort zone is okay. Just don't overdo it.
Black Forest.
Yeah, there has to be a balance. There has
Exactly,
to be a
Black
balance.
Forest.
Now, not to be that much of parang I may sound like I'm endorsing 13th age too much, but
It's okay.
there's
It's a nice system.
Everyone has their system.
Everyone has
And
their
everyone has a system like L5R for J and I believe
Sorry, the
J has
verse.
first edition.
One of the things I love about
Gardo edition.
one of the things I love about 13th age is that it's even from the character building and gaming portion or the power gaming portion of the system, as long as the GM is on top of things, it can make for an engaging experience that makes players, even power gamers, think beyond their stats. For example, in 13th age, you don't have skills. You have backgrounds. That alone will make you think, okay, my character was something before he was an adventurer. Now, one of the things that power gamers should think of doing is to put in a general background like spy. You think, okay, spy is we call this spy is for everything. You can use martial arts and whatnot. But if you leave it as that, there's a lot of potential wasted. Not just from the gaming concept, but from the storytelling concept. So, if let's say a player comes to me and says, "Oh, Jesus, you're a spy." Okay, who did you work for? What did you do as a spy? What was your specialty as a spy? Why are you not a spy right now? These questions, as the player keeps on answering them, you kind of put them in a corner, but at the same time, you improve the storytelling. He creates stuff that you can use later on against him or against other players in the game. And at the same and the best thing about it is that even though he thinks it would be used in all situations, because of the way you develop the background into something that's far more fleshed out and engaging, you inadvertently teach him how to focus on the narrative. And so parang nade-develop yung pagka non-gaming niya, well, or parang story power gamer niya. And at the same time, you keep him relevant and parang part of the creation of the world. Okay, last question? Wala? Okay, good. Thank you very much, everyone.
Parang sira yung camera.
And Toby, it's good. It's working na.
Para witness protection program.
Kaya nga eh, may black bar dapat.
Sensor.
Tapos lalalim ang may boses mo doon.
Bili ka na lang ng shades na.
May mechanical voice dapat, the distorted.
Okay, so thank you abubot.ph for the D30. Yan, leave it there. Leave it there. Okay, so...
Sponsor for the next seminar.
Ay! Ayun na, may grab bags. Pero walang laman. Branding lang.
30 pesos din eco bag,
Okay, so my talk is not going to be about your typical, usual GM player relationship. It's not going to be about the usual games. So this talk actually might not be something you'll be interested in. But I'm sharing it anyway because I want more people to try new things. Okay? So, my talk will be about narrative control. Narrative control, what it is, and how you can share it. Actually, I'm lying here. It's actually going to be why you should share it. But I didn't want to sound too imposing. Many GMs are very possessive of narrative control. Many players are very afraid of narrative control. And that's because many feel that narrative control is too big a concept. It's too encompassing in terms of role-playing games. When we talk about narrative control, we're talking about having control over the whole world. If you're playing a supers game, then that's control over not just the setting, not just your characters, not just your powers, but your enemies, but the people on the street, but the missions you'll go through. You're talking about understanding and stating what the consequences of actions will be. So, a lot of us are used to, I'll do this, and if I do this, we'll find out what happens next. But when you have narrative control, you already know what happens next. In fact, that's part of the reason why you might choose to do it. And it's sharing in the responsibility of coherence, which is a huge demand, a huge requirement. And players rarely want that. Because for most players, they just want to have fun, they just want to do the crazy thing, they just want to find out what happens if I do X.
And level up.
Diba? But when you have narrative control, you realize anything you decide on has to be fun for everyone. Anything you choose to do has to be cool for everyone. Now your choices aren't just your own. Your choices are part of what makes the game fun. So the big problem with narrative control, as positive as I've tried to make it sound, is what about player agency? Parang what's the point of playing the game if I don't have player agency? And some of you are wondering what player agency is, so in a single attempt, I shall cover it. Player agency is about making decisions that matter to your character. Diba? I'm a paladin, therefore I notice this camp with bandits, I have to confront them. Player agency demands I do that. And your decisions then have weight and consequences. Even better is if all of your actions actually have repercussions later down the line. Many feel this is what a player should only care about, and the narrative is up to the GM. So my attempt today is to try to say why it doesn't have to always be two separate things. Why players and GMs can share in narrative control and still maintain player agency. So, when we're talking about narrative control and player agency, we have normally the clashing of butts. The clashing of heads. Not butts, but butts are good. Okay. So normally when people think about having narrative control in their hands, they want to stop, they're scared. They're not sure which way is the right way to do things. They're not sure if what if I state that, you know, the dagger's poison, edi sinira ko na yung game because there wasn't plans for poison. Or what if I state that this person's actually the betrayer, baka naman the GM plans someone else to be the traitor. Those type of questions are what keep players from having, you know, a more confident stance towards narrative control. And it's understandable because most games don't share narrative control. Most games are a GM-player segregated relationship. Some games even have a GM-player adversarial. It's, you know, the GM must fight the players and try to kill them.
the players must survive the GM and try to win. I don't play that way. I used to, not as long as Mon has, of course. But in the many years I've been playing, I've gotten to the point that I've gotten tired of having to be the GM's enemy or the player's antagonist. I realized one of the best things about, when you're running a game is you hear players speculate. And all these speculations are, why are we just throwing them away? Why don't we make them part of the story? So, I've been talking a lot, and I'm hopefully still connecting with some of you. I'm not sure if this concept is really, really big. So I tried to condense it. I tried to make it something easier to understand. I first encountered sharing narrative control in a number of indie games. Although it did not start with John Wick's Houses of the Blooded, it was where I really got a better grasp of it. But earlier games have been having it. And the basic idea of narrative control is rather than tell the player or ask the player what do, you actually ask the player, you tell me. So it's something like, we see a dead body. Normal game, players, I'll look for clues, I'll look for the murder weapon, blah, blah, blah. Normal game, GM will go, okay, roll this stat. And then from the success, okay, you find blank. With shared narrative control, the ball totally changes the game. Because now, when you find a dead body, the GM asks the player, who is it? Player now decides. So the player could state, it's your mother. So now it's a murder of a family member. Likewise, the player might state, oh, it's Bishop Makani, the arch rival of your character. So someone has killed your enemy. The players are now all shaping the story at the same time. Hence, the importance of coherence. Diba? Like I mentioned earlier, narrative control requires players to be willing to have the responsibility of coherence. And the importance of making sure it's fun for everyone. So, since I believe they work together, and many of you are still wondering, parang, okay, how do games work when narrative control is shared? Parang, how does a mystery work when you're already the one giving the details? How does a suspenseful scene happen when you already know what's behind the door? Diba? In a normal game, I'll open the door, GM, what do I see inside? In a narrative control game, you can state what's inside. So how does it work? And the best way I could think of making it work was to break it down into what I felt were the key areas where there is conflict in seeing narrative control and player agency function. And that is consequence versus drama, creative freedom versus the system, setting the scene versus opportunities, and omniscience versus camera focus. So, we'll start with the first one, consequence versus drama. Consequence is all about, I'll do this, I'll find out what happens when I roll the die. Yeah. Consequence is also about, wala, you rolled bad, so you're dead.
You failed.
Diba? That's what consequence is. And there's nothing wrong with that. We feel that's how it should be because games follow a set of rules. Drama, on the other hand, is everything we see in movies and TV, which makes sense, but we also complain about. For example, patayin mo na, siya yung kontrabida. But they don't. And the story goes on. Diba? Or horror movies. Diba? Don't go alone, but still will. Diba? We hate them for doing that, but since they're doing it, the story works for us. So that's the opposing sides. Now, how do we unite the two? What we therefore do to unite them is to have an understanding of what each component shares. Consequence gives risk and suspense, and everyone understands that. Diba? I attack, if my roll is high enough, let's see, let's find out. There's of course the unlucky roll death, which is one of the negative sides, which is You know, you had this beautiful scene, you had this long adventure, and then in the last moment, okay, this happened, make a saving throw, then utter failure. You're suddenly just dead. And for some gamers, that's fine.
The mountain with this.
Diba? But sometimes it's totally anticlimactic. It's totally parang, why now? Nasira yung kwento. Drama, main characters very rarely die. Most of the time, they don't even die. And for some people, that's unthinkable in a role-playing game. Diba? What's the point kung hindi ka naman pala mamamatay? You do anything you want. Villains, oops, may nahulog. Yeah. In drama, villains earn their heroes. The main villains earn the ire of the heroes. Why? Because they keep coming back. Diba? A main villain is not a main villain because in the start of the game, he was presented as the one you have to kill. A main villain is a main villain because not only did he kill your parents, not only did he bring your town to the ground, not only did he make everyone else you love suffer, but when you saw him, he spat at your face and then escaped time and time again. That's what happens in drama, and that's what rarely happens in real games. Because normally in real games, either you do kill him and the GM goes, actually he's not the main bad guy. or you do kill him and then GM fudges the rules and goes, he escapes.
Or like Darth Maul.
Diba? So what happens is the player feels cheated. Not by the system, but by the GM. Rather than he feels it's part of the drama. So how do we combine the two? In shared narrative control, we have dramatic consequence. Here, the GM and the players consider the dramatic results. They have the final scene on the bridgeway, lightning flashes, the hero hits the villain loses his sword, the villain's helpless. Normal game, player, ay patayin mo na. And then bahala na sa roll. Maybe the GM and the player can decide on how the villain escapes and make it even dramatically more appropriate. Maybe the player mentions, as I charge in to finally kill you, that's when you reveal you had a hidden dagger and slash me across the face. You leave me scarred as you escape. So suddenly it feels very dramatically appropriate. Suddenly there's that feeling of, the later scenes I can bring that up. You did this to me! Diba? You're having the chance to have all these more awesome moments and you don't feel cheated. Diba? Suspense on moving plots forward. By having the choice of how things end and when things end, you then have the chance to build the suspense. Let's face it, in most games, only the GM creates the suspense. The players can only get the suspense when it's time to roll. But the players, they're mostly reactive. They're rarely active. With dramatic consequences, then you have the chances of that because a player can literally choose to do the wrong thing. Because you know as a player that the GM will use that to make the story even more awesome and the challenge even more interesting. Failing or falling forward is one of the key lines in indie gaming when it comes to narrative control being shared. And that is, failure does not mean not doing your action. It simply means not getting exactly the results you want. I stab you, you try to parry, you fail the roll. In a normal game, I stab you. In a shared narrative control game, you might declare, okay, you stab, the blade catches me, it doesn't hurt me, but as you pull your blade back, it catches my pendant, and you're now holding the keepsake that I've had of my father, the only image I have, in your hands. So, the fight still ends because you're like now stunned, realizing he might throw that away, he might get rid of it. The failure is still there, but it doesn't have to be the same failure. Another example of failing forward, which happens a lot in our Houses of Blood games, is when you have people accepting they lose a contract or a negotiation, but they know it as a player, not as the character. So you have the character, shaking the hands. Oh, we'll agree to this. This is perfect. It's fair for both of us. But as players, putang ina, this is gonna be crazy next game. Diba? Part of the fun of removing unlucky death when you share narrative control is now you realize, diba, as you said it, players don't kill GMs. Players do. But here now, the player can choose when he also dies.
It's part of the story.
Diba?
Yeah.
Kasi in the previous, the player will still die by his own actions kasi tanga siya. But with shared narrative control, you might even reach a point, alam mo, I can die here. And then I can start playing my son to avenge me.
Or sacrifice and save everyone.
Even if you never had a son in the game. Diba? Kasi you'll state, alam mo, diba, let's make it, I got that woman pregnant from And again, it's more drama. It's more story. Diba? So it's kind of hard to wrap your head around this type of thinking kasi it's parang you feel like you're cheating the game. But what in truth you're doing is you're making it bigger and more fun for you and the GM. Dire Peril is the counter to parang, you don't die naman pala eh. So what's the point? Walang suspense, walang danger. Dire Peril, and we haven't really used this because I haven't seen the need to, is when the GM declares this is a scene of dire peril. Meaning, yes, it's shared narrative, but now the dice will kill you if necessary. Now, your insult may lead to your death. Now, your act of stupidity won't just be a moment of stupidity. Dire peril is beautiful because now it becomes a threat you can bring up in a scene. So imagine a samurai game. You have all these scenes, all these moments of dishonor. And some games, ay, sa puko na kagad yan. But save it for dire peril. Save it for that moment when it will matter the most. The Emperor visits. It's a matter of dire peril. So after all these games of knowing you're safe, to have that suddenly thrust into you, the whole game will be tense. The whole time. And the long con. Who here has played games that are similar to Leverage or to Ocean's 11? Yung mga, the games where you wanted to build a plan and you wanted to have this game have all these parts, but you can never do it because the players have their own plan. In a shared narrative control, the long con can work. Because this can be we have a scene, we're in the airport, and then I might go and just suddenly tell you, so did you get what I needed? Ikaw as a player, huh? And I'd be like, the plans for the building? Yeah, I got it. And you're suddenly part of the con. You're suddenly part of the huge plan. It allows you to have scenes that never happened, but since you agree that it's happening for the sake of the story, for the sake of the fun, it moves forward. I'm gonna try to move faster because maraming topics to. But I'm hoping from this example palang you're starting to see how narrative control can be interesting to share. Creative freedom versus system. Creative freedom is I charge forward, I jump into the air, and while in the air, I somersault 2 times, and then I slash with my axe. And then GM goes, wala kang jump skill. Boom! But I'll still let you roll. So, we have creative freedom. A lot of new players will have a lot of this. Unless they're the shy types na, pwede na ako mag-attack. Diba? But some player, but most players, they have a lot of enthusiasm. They'll want to come up with out-of-the-box actions. And then you have inspired but uncovered actions. Diba? You might have a player who has the power of flight, and then he'll go, can I use my power of flight to make my punch land faster? Diba? And you're like, but that's not in the system. The system says you just move 5 yards per round. Then you have the first system wherein, okay, I'm gonna get flack for this, I'm sure. Game system balance. The reason why I have it in quotes, it's not real.
Doesn't exist.
But many believe it is. So I will not say more. But game system balance must be fair for all players. Diba? Pinayagan mo siya mag-double somersault habang tumalon at nag-flash ng axe. Hindi ako rin. Diba? And then ang sagot mo, okay lang, may job skill ka. Pero Ito, sagot ng third player, ang daya! Siya meron, siya wala.
Ako rin.
Magulo na yung system. Di ba? So yun yung clash. So how do we find a way to connect it? Especially since we want to always encourage creativity, not insanity.
Pubs.
Diba?
At least narrative insanity naman.
My hair.
Kaya tsaka si Fabs, ano
My
eh.
hair on fire.
Fabs is there's creativity, there's insanity. Fabs is nativity. Diba? Nanganganak ng sarili niya yun. Diba? Ano mo? May indestructible bahag?
Na may sariling ecology.
Unwashed for
Okay.
10 years.
So how does shared narrative control unite the two? Since system is the heart of every game and creativity is the heart of the players, we have a creative system. We'll have in-game systems that encourage creative ideas and motions or moves. A lot of games actually already have this. They're actually already letting players have some level of narrative control. The player just hasn't really realized it, or the GM hasn't really just given a word to it. And for example, in Fate, which is very, very new, one of the newer games that have come out within the gaming history of games, we have style or fate points. The very basic system of that is I have points. I want to add to the scene, I pay a point. So, we're in the room, the mob has surrounded you as you are playing cards. What do? You get a fate point. The windows are behind us? Okay! The windows are behind you. Oh yan, we can all jump out. That's already shared narrative control. The GM is allowing players to add to the scene. Exalted was one of the first games to codify a system that told players, make it sound awesome, I'll give you extra stuff. Diba? The stunt system. Clunky, but it was there na. So many of you are now suddenly realize, shit, nag-share narrative control na pala ako. And other games like World of Darkness and the like have willpower recovery based on abstract virtues. You have virtues that say courage or prudence or fortitude, and for some reason you'll be, I know since I did that, I'm showing my generosity. Some players will even add, kasi when I was raised, when I was young, I was always showing, So you're already actually creating backstory out of the blue. That's already narrative control to some degree. So it's already there. The systems are there. It even gets more interesting if you play games that have narrative control shared as the forefront of the system. And that will take a seminar of its own to cover. But my point today is just to at least open your minds into considering stuff and trying new things. So we're already moving forward. We're already seeing the other side of the coin. We're already seeing how narrative control can be a possible thing to consider in your games. We're halfway there. Of the 4 areas of conflict, we've already covered 2. So now we have the set scene and the opportunities. By set scene, I'm talking about all of you GMs who had at least 2-3 notebooks worth of setting information, maps that you've sketched, backgrounds about characters and all this and that. We as GMs love to plan ahead. We love to create our scenes. We love to write down our NPCs. Minsan may mga quotes pa yan. Ay, kailangan mangamit ko tong quote na to. Para later, I sound like I planned the scene. We love to try to come up with stories in advance. Ay, yung character ni gusto ko may love angle siya mamaya. Dapat may in love siya dito sa princess na to. So when you play the scene, lahat ng gagawin mo para may in love sila, gagawin mo. Diba? And then in the end, but my character's gay. So bigla kang, but he's actually used to be a man. So, maandar kagad. And then we have unexpected betrayal. When you try to set the scenes, when GMs try to set the scenes, they love trying to come up with a betrayer that players never expected. Ano yan? Parang what's the word? Parang white elephant. Yan yung parang goal ng GMs. I want to have that moment where I go, he's behind it, and all the players go, yun yan eh. For opportunities naman, you have creative world building, and you have players playing to their strengths. In creative world building, if you play with an established system, let's say Forgotten Realms, you have tomes of material to go through. You have novels that sometimes contradict the tomes to go through. And then when you play with other gamers, suddenly they're playing something differently. And you have that dissonance. How do I fix that? Opportunities to play to the strengths of the characters is also there when you still focus on opportunities. You're playing a barbarian, your highest is strength, but then your second highest is charisma. I want to have scenes that utilize that para hindi naman sayang ang points mo. Diba? It's an unspoken communication when players put their stats kasi. Yun ang gusto kong scene. Diba? If I get a thief with high dexterity and high charisma, I want to be a charming rogue. Whereas if I play, let's say, a cleric, but my cleric has strength highest, and let's say religion is the highest stat, it sounds like a dissonance, but that's the player telling you, I want to get into a lot of scenes where fighting is involved or strengths are involved, and I want to push my religious agenda. So you want to make sure you create things that play to the strengths of the characters, but you also want to make them dive into their weaknesses. This is unthinkable. Diba? Lowest codex. Iwasan ko yan. I'll put on armor. Lowest mo is strength. I'll stick to ranged weapons. Ganyan. But what about playing to the weakness? What about embracing it? What about making use of it as the drama of the scene? All these TV series have the main character. He loves women. How many times will there be an episode where he gets seduced? Diba? For a player, iwas yan. Hindi ka na type. Diba? But why not embrace it? Why not dive into it? So, we then have shared scenes. When you create your world, players can create it too. You talk about the city and it's fantastic, and then you mention, and currently there's a festival. Then you look at one player. What's the festival about? The player can decide. On the spot, they can come up with something creative. Or maybe they've been dying to finally have, it's the feast day of my deity. Okay, it's the feast day of your deity. But that's the point. By sharing the world building, you're telling the players, tell me what you want. But you don't have to tell me while the game's not running. You can tell it to me as part of the game. Diba? And that's because the GM likes to get surprised. A lot of people in my games, Rocky will attest to this. It's a common joke among them. If you have ideas that you don't want Toby to use, don't say it while the game is running. So stuff like they're talking and talking, then one player will go, naku, paano kung siya pala yung traitor, no? Let's shh! And ako, I'm like, narik ko yun. But that's the fun that the GM can get from a shared narrative game. Because now the GM also gets surprised. Not only surprised on what the players will do, but what the players also want to explore. The beauty there is the GM's not carrying it all by himself. The GM knows that the players will also challenge themselves. So yan, you have your character who loves women. You enter the scene and you might declare to the player, so I show up and there's two women right now. My arms are wrapped over their shoulders. And as we sit down, the first thing you all notice, my wedding ring na. Diba? So the players suddenly realize, okay, there's something big happening here. The stories feel less quest-driven and more feel like you're reacting to events that the players are involved in. Inevitable betrayal is one of the huge benefits of a shared scene. Yes, that quote is from there. But inevitable betrayal is this. We all know he will betray us. But we'll trust him pa because the story is still going forward at that point. It still feels okay. And some of you will feel, parang tanga naman, why would the players still trust? Let's face it, in real life, we know a lot of people who shouldn't be who they're with.